In sales, as in life, there's typically one or two mindsets that people have. One is the gambler. Now, a gambler looks at life and sales and a lot of things like a game of chance. And they either feel lucky or they feel unlucky. They have a favorite, they get a hunch, and they like that thrill. And there is some biochemistry behind gambling, and gambling can become an addiction. And if you look at sales like gambling, it may be exciting, it may be thrilling, but are you applying the other end of the mindset, that of an investor? Now, an investor looks at things much more analytically. They do research, they compare things, they have models, they think through things, and they think they're making a well-informed judgment call about what action they take. Now, try not to get emotional about this. I did a post on LinkedIn about, are you a gambler or an investor? Now let's take prospecting. If you're a gambler, you don't think that any of them are any more likely to win or buy from you than any other. But you get a hunch. You take a chance. You play the numbers. You do your 50 calls a day. Now, what's the opposite of that? An investor does just the opposite. Investor goes, well, all 50 are not going to buy. Maybe one will buy or have a meeting with me or conversation. I will try and sort based off of who's most likely to have that conversation. Now, if you're a gambler, you're going to argue with me. You're going to say, well, I've got some skills, I've got some game, maybe, but then you're moving more to the spectrum of the mindset of an investor. And it's not like a lot of people aren't just one or the other. They're kind of in the spectrum. And honestly, I look at the gambler as lazy and overconfident in a skill that doesn't exist. Because if you've ever met a gambler, and some people are lucky, some people just naturally, maybe it's even subconscious, it's not a conscious action, but they get a hunch, and maybe that is an unconscious investing skill. But in sales, if you're not an investor, if you don't look at it and apply your intellect to it, apply your experience, apply your logic and your heuristic or algorithm to who is most likely to buy, you're going to be very busy. But are you going to be effective? Let's take something like the stock market, which, again, there's like the day traders, which are kind of more like gamblers. That they have their charts and they have hunches and they have patterns that they look at. But still, they're much more like gamblers. And then there's the investors, the people who have particular types of companies that they look at. They look at the economic situation. And yes, they do not know what the future holds. Nobody does. But they're making an educated guess at it. And the gamblers will argue that the investors are just gamblers too. My point isn't just to make that distinction. My point is to apply the mindset. Be conscious about how you spend your time, because you are spending time. The time is going by whether you acknowledge it or not. And we only really have time to work with. It's one of the most critical elements of the game of sales. How are you investing or spending your time to get where you want to go? And the pendulum has swung so far to just pure activity, which is one of the elements of your algorithm, but it is not the only one. If you've seen my interviews with people who are great on the phone. Now, you could write down their script, but how good are you at applying it? The same is true for comedy. The same is true for cooking. It's a performance profession. Now, if you were to invest the time in becoming great at how you deliver that script, timing, pauses, tonality, all of that, your effectiveness goes up. Let's get into this interview. This is a listener. I really enjoyed this, and I like to unpack how he is selling. And the hardest part is determining which deals are most likely to close. And I'll sum it up at the end because some of this stuff is in winning the complex sale, but the complex sale course takes it probably tenfold this. Imagine where this person will be 10, 15 years from now. That's where we would be with the course. Let's get into the interview. Before we do, make sure you're checking out our friends over at Co-Video. Video email is one of the new tools, one of the new superpowers that you could apply to your sales process as far as communicating and demonstrating who you are and what you can do and help people with. Covideo.com. Let's get into the interview. Hey, Justin, welcome to the show. As way getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Hey, Brian, good to be with you today. I appreciate you having me. So my evolution through sales has taken place over the last 15 years, and I've gone from selling everything, starting off in insurance and getting a phone book, and the joke was to call until they buy or die, all the way up to what I do now, and I'm in capital equipment and pretty consultative, strategic selling process. Live in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which for anybody that doesn't know, about 40 minutes north of Logan. And live with my wife and two kids and work for a company called Bruckner Group USA, and specifically Kiefel packaging. So we specialize in packaging equipment.
Wow, cool. And has this been your favorite type of sale?
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody that's been in sales gets that, that rush. For me, it's the sustained strategic approach that produces the rush. And when you finally get that aha moment in the sales process, to me, that's a challenge that I really get excited about. I don't have too good of an attention span, as most salespeople tend not to. However, when it comes to the challenge of a 6 to 12 to 18 month sale, yeah, that gets me going. And sometimes even longer than that. It's not out of the realm of possibility that a sales cycle could be 24 to 36 months.
So you're selling capital equipment it's packaging machine? Is that what
right? So we're specifically in thermoforming. In the world of thermoforming, if you ever gone to a restaurant,
exciting.
Well, hey, I won't go too deep into it, but it actually is kind of exciting because the technology is really, really cool. But we make everything. Our machines produce everything from like a ramekin that you'd get from a restaurant to a to-go container to cups, and we've recently moved into fiber thermoforming, so that's more sustainable. So we do both plastics and fiber, and yeah, the technology is amazing. Kiefel makes a great product. It's the fastest and most efficient in the world. So yes, I don't sell on price, but I do sell on quality.
And who is the persona that you're talking to at the customer side?
Yeah, always see, this is kind of a great question because you've got that initial contact, right? And that point of contact could be, that's not the person. That's not the person. and I mean, it's rarely the person. I think 1 out of 100, you might actually get the person to reach out directly. And the way that I kind of see the process evolving is that person that initially contacts you is going to be there throughout the process, right? So you need to get to know them. No matter who they bring into the room, no matter how many signatures they need to get, that person that reached out typically is with you from cradle to grave. So that's my first challenge. But ultimately, the person that I'm talking to the most at the end of the process is almost always a VP or the CEO, CFO. We work with a lot of tier 1 companies, so companies that are Fortune 500. You might need anywhere between 15 and 20 signatures on a PO before it's released. So yeah, you got to know your audience.
And so they assign it to somebody who's typically
exactly
either an admin of some kind or
right.
because they're going to call you and two others probably.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. That's and so now I'm good after all these years at sniffing out when I just might be that going through the motions third person that they're calling. But yeah, no, they typically will do that fact finding discovery delegation to this person. Then this person will call me and they'll say, hey, I need to get some information on your products, and that usually is the first stage. But I never discount that. Even if you can't
them.
You can't, because if you do that, you've already taken yourself off the table. And I feel like there are situations where I might be the third person. Maybe they said, hey, call one more company, let's see what their numbers at, but we have some value added that other people don't have, and that can be uncovered during the process. So I never discount that.
Because a lot of people misinterpret this, because if they call from procurement, it might be that it's already decided. But if they call from either probably operations, manufacturing, they're finding the contestants for the beauty contest.
Exactly. And I think what I've noticed, Brian, is that typically when procurement calls, you're absolutely right. It might just be
they're just filling the file.
Yeah, and immediately you're haggling on price, and that's not a road we want to go down. You know what I mean? Because it's just not. It's not a situation where you're going to win. But yeah, when you get the initial contacts, I think the important piece is, and I've heard guys on your show and ladies on your show say this so much, to be able to qualify quickly, to know where you're at, to get a pulse of where you're at, what homework have they done, and if you're asking them the tough questions, do they have the answers? Yeah. And what I mean by that is I'm not afraid to ask those tough questions. I'll be very direct. And if they don't know the answers, then and maybe this isn't as big of an initiative as they made it out to be in some ways.
And when can you sense that?
Yeah. So good question. I think for me, I always try to have these gates. So are we making it through the first gate? Yes, we're making it through the first gate. Each gate kind of symbolizes the next step in the process. And as well as anybody, being an expert in sales and so forth, you got to celebrate the small wins, right? So those little gates are important because it means you're moving throughout the process. But I typically can smell real quickly if this is an initiative that's organizationally based, or if somebody's doing this on their own time. And you have to ask the right questions, right? So Brian, if we move forward today, who else is going to be involved in this conversation? And if they're like, well, this person should be involved. Okay, can you get them involved? Well, it's not right time yet. If there's always these delays in terms of getting to the actual table we're going to sit at, then I tend to think, okay, this might be a long-term process, or maybe it's not a process that is worth going through, to the 10th degree right now.
And so let's say they go, okay, well, yeah, this VP should be involved. You try and schedule that call.
Yeah.
How do you win that part of it?
Good question. So I will usually throw it back on them, and I'll say, well, if we need to get Brian involved, for instance, what steps do I need to take? What information do you need? What do you need me to guide you through that process to get him involved? Take down those things. So I'm making notes strenuously on my notepad. As soon as I've delivered on that, then you should see some return on your investment, right? You should see Brian's now in the picture. And if you're still not, then I simply say, hey, Jim, I know you said this is what I needed to do to deliver these things. When are we going to get Brian involved if we haven't already? And usually just kind of work your way through that. It's kind of you don't want to insult people,
right?
But you need to have the right audience, because otherwise you're just spinning your wheels.
I had one product that I was selling, and it was this exact motion. You get this call, and a lot of times it was an admin for a CTO or chief architect.
Mm-hmm.
And you could tell immediately that they're just collecting stuff. Now, I would ask, what else are you looking at, just to make sure we're in the right place, or I could point you to the people that you should be talking to.
Exactly. And you go through those processes, right? You go through, I use the model of BANTA. So budget, application, need, timeline, authority. And those are the boxes that I try to check, just to give a gut check, a sanity check. Hey, is this a legitimate opportunity? Is this something I'm going to walk upstairs to the CEO's office and say, here you go. This, you can count on this coming at this date? No, most of the time it's a definitive no. But yeah, I just try to gauge it, and I try to make sure that I'm communicating effectively with the person. But yes, you're absolutely right. It's typically, sometimes it's just a person doing some discovery.
And I got to believe in your space, you're either augmenting their capacity, replacing an existing thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if you can get behind that, it's like, are you having problems with the current machine?
Yeah, and then understanding their needs. I mean, it sounds kind of cliche, but understanding where they're currently at. And yes, you're right. 90% of the time, it's replacing a current piece of equipment. Now, these pieces of equipment can range anywhere from 850,000 all the way up to 2 million per machine. So you've really got to gauge what's important to them. What are they looking for? Are they a current customer? In my world, if they're a current customer, it's very different than if it's a prospective customer, because you've got to now, it's a whole nother ballgame. You've got trust involved, you got deliverables. But yes, they're 90% of the time they're replacing a piece of equipment or they're adding capacity, which it's really important to understand the big picture.
Now, once you give the person what they ask for, how do you get that next step without them thinking they've got everything they need?
That's a good point, right? So you don't want to give them too much. You don't want to give them everything. You don't want to give them everything. If you give them everything, now you've kind of cut yourself at the knees, and they're like, "Well, I don't need you anymore." And if they don't need you, you're not going to hear from them. And
they
that is
think they need you,
right? They don't think they need you, and that's probably the most. I think that's a mistake that I made a lot when I was younger. Brian would call me and I'd say, yeah, I'll give you this, this, and this. I'd get it to him in like 2 hours, in this thorough approach. And then I'm thinking 2 weeks later, when I've called 3 times, I've left a voicemail.
They don't need you.
They don't need you. Yeah. So what I try to do is I always kind of, I use the term buyer's journey. I use kind of all these catchphrases, but it some of it's pertinent, some of it's not. But I will ask that question at the beginning real directly. How do you go to purchasing this type of equipment? What is your process? And then they'll give you an answer. 90% of the time their answer is not right. So what I do, or it's not accurate. They don't know. Yeah. So what I do is I judge based on what they're doing rather than what they're telling me.
Yes.
Actions speak louder than words in so many ways. And somebody could be saying, yes, this is going to come, this is going to come, this is going to come, but their actions don't show it. So it's really kind of a give and take, and understanding really where the prospect's at, where the customer's at, and where they are in that journey. And there is a journey. It just might not be what they think it is.
Well, that's it. Because if you do give them everything, like you said, they're not going to call you back, and they think they're comfortable, but they're not going to buy or spend close to $1 million on something without, really understanding. Because the people that they have to sign off, they go like, why'd you pick this one?
Right.
It can't be because the guy was nicer or they gave me this beautiful brochure.
I know. And, people always say, well, people buy from people they like. And I think there's some truth to that, but
people will talk to people they like.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the thing. That's that connection piece, right? Yeah. But then when it comes down to it, their jobs depend on it. And if they buy a piece of equipment for $1.5 to $2 million and it fails, you know who that's on. And that's why you can't always discount who the person coming to you is, because they could ultimately be the person that championed that sale. And they're putting their life on the line a little bit for you. So you've got to think of it that way.
Because I used to try and confuse that person. I would say, well, it's anywhere from here to here, but let me ask you some questions. Are you running into this thing? Are you worried about, and they'd be like, I don't know any of that, Brian. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's make sure we get you the right thing. And if we're not the right thing, I'll point you in the right direction.
Exactly. And people appreciate that, right? That's a good way to be.
Hand the wrong thing to the boss.
Right. There's nothing more valuable. And I say this too, it's just things that I've picked up over the last 15, 16 years. They are going to put their trust in you, and you've got to take that trust. And it's kind of like a fiduciary financially. You're trusting somebody with your money. What are they going to do? And you need to make sure that every systematic approach that you take is tailored to that individual's needs. There is no one size fits all in 7-digit deals. There isn't. There,
No.
I don't care what anybody says. You can have a model. You can be, you can have Miller Hyman training or Sandler training. It doesn't matter what school of thought you went to. There's no roadmap that's perfect. So you really need to tailor it to each individual need.
Now, you have 3 C's that you kind of go by.
I do.
How do you come up with them?
So to me, I've had a lot of losses, right? I've lost some deals. And so that's a gut check.
Isn't it?
It is. There's nothing more true about a salesperson than when they lose a deal. What do they do with that? And part of that for me is thinking, okay, where's my skill set? Where's my strength? So I go by the 3 C's, and it's consistency, credibility, and connection. Connection's going to be that first one. And, we just talked about it. People buy from people they like. They'll talk to who they like. I think if you've got connection, that really gets you off on the right foot. People that are interested in talking to you, that's a good thing. Credibility. Do you know enough about your product in order to walk them through this process? I don't need to be a subject matter expert. In fact, I'm not. If you asked me what type of screws and nuts and bolts we use on the KMD90, I don't know that I'd be able to tell you right off the bat, but I do know how to help you build a business case and walk you through the sales process. So you've got that. And then consistency is the most important thing. And it's the most important thing that I judge my customers by, and it's what I want to give them. Because if they know what to expect, if they know that I'm always going to deliver when I say I'm going to deliver, if they know if I'm going to call, I'm going to be on that call 5 minutes early, consistency is the key, because then you've become consistent in their mind, and consistency will then trickle down in their organization because of it. And you make them look good when you're consistent, right?
Well, consistency is one of the major ingredients of trust.
Exactly. No. So those are the 3 principles that I've sat around and I've thought, well, where did I lose this deal? Where did I go wrong? And that's, those are just that's the model that I go by. And those are the things I focus on the most.
And that's it. Because when I meet a rep or I talk to the rep who lost a deal and they go, yeah, you win some, you lose some. That rep is never going to be successful.
Never. Oh, man. I can't think of more words my boss would want to hear less than, well, you win some, you lose some. Never going to be successful like that. You got to do the autopsy, right?
I've called reps out on that, even SEs out on it. It's like, that's not the attitude.
No, it can't be.
We don't compete to win. We compete to kill.
It can't be. No, and when you're in such a space, think about the competition around you. There are first-class, top-notch professionals that are in your industry, and they're going to beat you if you take that attitude, because you win some, you lose some. That's just not. It's not a winning attitude.
Right. And so what have you learned from those lessons? Because I'm sure you remember some of them.
I do. In fact, I could tell you almost every one. We'd be here for a lot longer than a half an hour. I think that I had a boss, my last manager at my last position, and he always told me, if you're not getting better, you're getting worse. So at the end of the day, when I sit down and I take a pulse, right, it's just almost like, at the end of the day, you got to kind of figure out where you're at. Bring your balance back. I've learned that I'm not going to be perfect. I've learned that I am going to have my strengths. I'm going to have my weaknesses. But I have learned, and I think one of your guests said it recently in December. He said something about grit. And that grit is what wakes me up every day and says, hey, what can I do today? So I've learned that resiliency is key. And I've learned that I'm not going to have all the right answers at all the right times. But it's okay to say that. It's okay to get some guidance. It's okay to have your resources. So I guess to answer your question more succinctly, I've learned that not every deal is going to happen, but I need to know why the deal didn't happen. And if I know why, I can diagnose on my end. More than any metric, more than anything you're going to see in a CRM, it's more of a gut check.
Right, because that getting better part keeps you a little bit anxious and wondering what could go wrong. And what I always just say is, if I was the competitor, what would I be doing right now?
Exactly, right? You're asking all the right questions, and I think that's probably why you're making a career out of this. And that's a great question to ask, because they're out there, they want that 7-digit deal just as bad as you do. And at the end of the day, it's going to be who comes up with a more strategically sound approach. And if you're slacking, I always say when things are going good, that's the day to stay and make the extra call, go the extra mile because you're on that roll and confidence shows. And so when things are going good, keep that ball rolling. And yeah, it's a tough game. I mean, if I was to tell a 22-year-old coming out of college if sales is going to be a walk in the park, it's not, and it's not for everybody. But I've seen people that maybe don't have the prototypical sales pedigree that are very good at it. And why? Because they're strong, they have grit, and they are always looking to get better. And if you're doing that, I don't think anybody upstairs can fault you either.
And that's it. People get way too comfortable. They're doing the things, they're giving the demo, give a presentation, give a proposal, schedule a negotiation call. But it's a whole lot more to it. And people don't understand that everyone thinks it's like this committee sits at a table and they write down their vote on a piece of paper and they fold it over and they slide it in. No.
The selection process.
It's much more like a family going out to dinner in a station wagon going, you want Chinese, Mexican, Italian? And it flip flops, 5 times between the time they leave the house and they hit the restaurant.
Yeah, and you know what? That's a great point because when I first got into I want to say like 6 7 digit deal making. I always thought there'd be this round table, and it'd be, oh well, here's the pros and the cons, and in reality, that's so far from the truth. And I think when you're in this type of selling environment, and certainly, I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention what COVID has done to the high digit sales world, because now I don't get on a plane on Monday. I don't shake hands with everybody. It has changed drastically. So that's been a challenge. I'll be honest with you. That's been a real challenge, is figuring out how to effectively manage that. But yeah, it's people talking over lunch and they say, well, this guy's got that. There are so many opportunities in a long sales cycle to mess up. You've really got to pitch the perfect game.
Right. And
And
no one's going to tell you you're losing.
right.
Everyone's smiling and, oh,
Yeah.
Justin, what your brochure was the prettiest thing I've seen all day. And,
Just pleasantries.
I don't know how it's going, but I'm sure it's going good.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think the worst thing for me in my job is when I think a deal's coming and it doesn't.
Our confirmation bias blinds us. Our need to, close and confirm that we're great.
Yeah.
Blinds us from what is really happening, because they're telling all the salespeople the same things.
Right. Exactly. And it's such a great point, because they are universally approaching this the same way. And unless you're, and that's why I go back to focusing on their actions rather than their words. Because if what they're doing and what they're saying is not matching up, then we have a problem here. And I'm sure, like a lot of the different industries, our team here is extremely busy. So if I take resources and I devote them to a project that I haven't done my due diligence on, and that I haven't figured out where it needs to go, then I've really put the company in jeopardy, because that's time we could have spent on another deal. And in this environment, resources are scarce, and it's global. Our company's global. So I've got about 3 hours in the morning that Germany's still rocking and rolling, and I need to make those minutes count.
And how many deals do you need to do in a year?
Yeah. So, I mean, my goal for this year is probably 6 to 8 deals, depending on the size. We are in a new industry with fiber. Those deals tend to come in bundles, so it could really overperform. I'm hesitant to say a number, because then my boss is going to pull this video up later.
Hold on, he's on the
phone. Yeah, later on, he's going to be like, "Hey, you said this."
12 is doable.
Yeah. But I think that the big picture is that I always want to make sure, and I'm sure that you've talked to other like-minded salespeople, I don't want to have those big ruts. I want to make sure that my deals are kind of falling in place strategically throughout the year, so I never go too far without one. And if it does happen, it's going to happen. But I would say, 6, 8, 10 deals, definitely some multiple machine deals in that. At the end of the day, from what I see and from where I sit, the economy, I think companies have to go back to what they were doing before. So I'm optimistic for this year. I'm optimistic. And I do think that the forward-thinking companies, and I'm sure you have some as clients, are thinking, well, we could look at this one of two ways. This is a time where we shouldn't spend any money because of the economic downturn and unpredictability. And then you have forward thinking companies that say, hey, if we're going to put these pieces of equipment in place and processes in place, this is the perfect time to do it. So when that pent up demand comes, we can hit the ground running.
And what are the signals that you're losing, and what do you do about it?
Yeah. So the signals that I'm losing, I had a situation not too long ago. The biggest signal that I can pick up that something's going wrong is when the customer, if I have to constantly be hounding the customer as opposed to the customer calling me. It really matters, right? Because if the prospect or the customer is calling me, that means that they're sitting at their desk saying, I've got to talk to Justin Pike. If I'm constantly going the other way, then they're just avoiding me. And that's the biggest signal. It's that action thing. The other thing that, that I can always pick up on is if things go full speed for a certain amount of time, and then all of a sudden they drop off. Yeah. And they say, well, we're just figuring out, we're doing our selection. I'm like, no, that's probably not the case, because if things were still going at the speed you said they were, then I would still be having regular communication. The only other thing that I ever look for is I will ask, and I'm big on questions. Probably, I think I do ask some of the toughest questions. I'll always ask, and I'll bring it up I'll be like, hey, Brian, it seems like we're going off the tracks here. What happened? And just be quiet. You know what I mean? Like, just be quiet. Let them talk, because if something is going wrong, they're going to say it at that point, or they'll at least give you some indication.
Yeah, that pregnant pause.
Exactly.
It's like putting a 50-pound backpack on their back. It's like, okay, your turn now.
Yeah. And you know what? I think in our world, you got to be able to do that. You got to be able to ask the tough questions. And if you can't,
and even if they say, oh, well, we've been busy, we've been focused on something else, don't respond.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
That's how I don't buy that. Let's get to the real thing.
Yeah. And you know what? It's okay to say that.
Right.
I think people will respect you when you give them the courtesy of not wasting their time. They're not wasting yours. Let's just be direct. We both put our pants on the same way in the morning. Let's be direct.
Now, okay, you get that signal you're losing, but this is a big deal. You put 3, 6, 1. What do you do to win it back?
Yeah. So that's the time where I will, I think one of the biggest mistakes of salespeople is ego and thinking that they can tackle everything themselves. And if I know that I'm putting a deal at risk, or if I'm not sure what's going on, I think asking for help in that case is a good thing to do. Use your team around you. I'll typically go to this is the perfect time to bring the manager in, right? Because then he can get involved, and then it can be a shared responsibility. But I'll use my team. I'll ask for help. And then I'll also ask the customer. I'll say, look, it doesn't seem like we're on track here. What do we need to do to get it back on track? What are we missing? Am I missing something? Is there something wrong with the way that I've delivered it? And asking those questions. Yeah. I mean, I always try to use my resources, and I try to ask the right question at the right time.
And let's say they become honest with you. Johnson & Johnson has the defibrillator that's twice the speed as yours and half the waste.
Yeah.
So some red herring thing that they put in that you don't do.
Right. So that can happen. And I think at that point, if it's really something you can't do, don't play hero ball. I think at that point, you got to say, all right, well, it seems like things have changed. And now, in this case, maybe we aren't the right fit. And if you say that, and then you look at them and you say, am I right? You're going to get an answer there too. And all you got to do is get that pause. Am I right? Because the Johnson & Johnson might be the right fit. And so I think that having that conversation, I know I'm giving you a lot of answers that are, circumstantial, but I think that it really is important. I think you've got to call them out when they say something like that. And it's okay to say, okay, well, if we're not the right fit, then hopefully we have a chance to revisit this in the future. If something changes, let me know. I've done that, Brian, and I know it sounds cringeworthy, but you wouldn't believe how many people come back after that conversation.
But most of the time, what they call a red herring, something that the other person has made important that isn't important.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. That happens all the time.
And it should. That's what
It
we should
should.
be doing, right?
That's right. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
Hey, that's my
100%.
skit.
Yeah. That's awesome. No, you hit the nail right on top of the head.
Right. Have you've seen that a lot, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, all the time. I mean, that's something that you see all the time. There's so many things that I can look at now that I can say, geez, this is classic, but those all come with experience. And that's why listening to your videos, watching different, different podcasts, listening to it, that's part of the getting better thing, right? Because you do see those things. How I react to them at age 40 is is very different than how I reacted to them at age 25. And I think that experience is golden in that case.
Yeah, because you'll close 6 to 8, but you'll work on 16, 30.
Yeah. I would say, a hit rate in our industry is 10 to 20% for closing. So I usually try to have 6 to 8x than what I need to hit in my pipeline. I know that sounds like a lot. But if you're honest with yourself at the end of the day and you're looking at the right numbers, that's not that much. And it is a lot. It's a lot organizationally because you've got a lot of projects, but.
Right. But the productivity part of it is, probably 80% of your time is working on things you're not getting paid for.
It is, but then again, if this was easy, no, everybody would be doing it. So I do spend a lot of time on the background work. I spend a lot of time with our engineering team and a lot of time here and there. I think that it's a great point. And the only thing that I would say to that, Brian, is if you don't, the customer will know. So if you don't do that work, the productivity, the preparation, they know right away. And I think you've probably heard this a lot. You've got 15 or 20 minutes if you're in a C-level office, if that. And his or her attention can turn off in a second. So maximizing that, I always say land your punches. I believe firmly in it because you've got to know when you're landing them, and the only way you know that is if you've prepared well enough.
And I'm sure you're exposed to a lot of reps, competitors, coworkers, friends, family, whatever. What differentiates you?
Yeah, I think anybody that knows me well would say tenacity. Yeah. There's nobody hungrier. I mean, I really, and I'm not saying that to sound overconfident, but Tom Brady, I'm from Boston, right? Yeah. He asked him, which ring's your favorite? And his answer immediately, the next one. I really believe that's what gets me through every day because I want to help people be successful. In the end, I'm judged on performance, but I'm also judged on if I'm helping my customers make money and if their decision to buy was a good one. That's an extreme burden on somebody in terms of their shoulders and responsibility. And I want to make the most of it. So I work as hard as I possibly can every day. And I love the challenge of going to work every day.
And how much of it is intellectual versus work ethic?
Yeah. Good question. We've got a younger guy that works with us now and he's just getting into the business. And so now we go over these situations every week, like, hey, this is what happened. What do you think? And I'll be like, well, 10 years ago, I would have thought this and I would have done this. And now I know this is, little things I think are experience. Intellectually, I don't think I'm superior to anybody. I mean, I think that if
right, but there's the smart person who's got the equations on the wall.
Yeah,
who's trying to figure out how we can use pi in this deal.
Yeah, no, I'm not that guy.
And then there's the young guy with the football helmet on and go, there's the wall, go through it.
Right. And I'd like to think that strategically speaking, if I'm good at my job, then I've done that. I've done that calculation in my head and I always try to stay one step ahead. So where do I see this going? And can I predict where the roadblocks are going to be so that when they come up, it's like a walk in the park. Right. And if you do that,
I had a sale that was very similar to this.
Yep.
And it was just full of traps.
Yep.
And I knew this is the trap. And I just watched my counterparts at the beginning of the quarter. Oh, sure, it's going to happen. Yeah. And I'm like, that's not going to happen.
No. And you can, 90% of the time I find that I am right when I predict something like that. And I do think that there's that all comes with experience, and it comes with your ability to understand the prospect. A lot of guys will go in and they'll try to product dump on a meeting. And if I talk more than 25% of the time, I think I've lost that meeting. Because what I want to know, especially when you're first getting to know a situation, is I want to hear everything you have to say. And then I want to take that information, I want to digest it and come up with a game plan. I think the biggest mistake I see younger reps make is that they talk. And your job is to listen.
Right. It's product knowledge. And it's like,
yeah,
no, cool.
Exactly.
Hey, it's been a fun conversation, Justin. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, Justin Pike, and like I mentioned, I work for Bruckner Group USA. So if you see the company, I'm there. And I just got to tell you that you really do make a difference in my day as a salesperson, because I'm not just saying that. Every day I watch the videos. Every day I listen to the podcast, and you put out really good material. And I try to grab those golden nuggets, and even just getting to have the conversation with you has been a pleasure.
What a great story. I think we all should take a look at our pipeline, take a look at our territory, and not just look forward to a new quarter, but look back at the past quarter. How did we spend our time? What deals did close? And what deals did we invest, or gamble on? Now, when you lose a deal, you tend to think you were gambling. When you win a deal, you tend to think you're investing. But there are certain characteristics of the ones that close. There's the obvious ones. Existing customers are going to buy more, most likely. New customers are typically going to drift. Everyone gets comfortable with the idea of no decision, status quo. That's a lost deal. If you won't admit it's a lost deal, you got to admit it's a lost time. We spent time on it, and we got nothing for it. Now, the magic of B2B sales is we're on commission, which is a magical thing. There's almost very few jobs out there where you have such control over your income. And typically we're in sales because we're money motivated, which is a great thing, because then we're aligned. And if you spend time on something and you get nothing, you can kind of sit back and say, well, I learned a lot. Okay, but learning means that you won't repeat it. If you learned it and repeat it, did you really learn it? I think we have to be brutally truthful with ourselves on this. Otherwise, we tend to repeat the same things, which is natural in the B2B sale, in the complex sale, because there's long time gaps between it. It's not every morning we step in the puddle like in Groundhog Day, and he learns not to step in the puddle after doing it twice or three times. So how many times is it going to take us to learn not to step in that puddle? Check the movie out. You can just check out the scene on YouTube. You'll get it. It's been a long time. It's a 30-year-old movie. But it's a great analogy for the complex sale. Now, what if you became better at this? Either increased your win rate, increased the deal size, or reduced the number of deals that weren't going to close, no matter what you did. Like if your competitor is already in there and they're looking at you and your competitor again, that's a lot more effort. There's trust, there's install base, there's relationships, there's the contract is already in place, it's already been improved. If they're happy with that, it's going to be hard to either replace it or upsell to your stuff. Doesn't mean it's not possible, it's just less likely. Compared to somebody who has your stuff in there already. These little algorithms we need to think about. And in the course, Winning the Complex Sale, these are the things I teach you about. They're the most advanced elements of a large complex sale. And yes, you have to be curious about learning them. Otherwise, your confirmation bias will take over and you'll learn it and forget it, which means you didn't learn it. It'll come up again when the mistake happens and you go, oh, I know that was going to happen. Well, if you knew it was going to happen, why did you let it happen? Well, I forgot about the lesson I learned. This is human nature. And when you're playing a long, drawn-out game, and many of them simultaneously, it's natural that you're going to fall into these traps because it takes conscious effort not to. How about this trap? Send me a proposal. Isn't that a magical trigger to most reps? They're ready to buy. No, that is a deadly pothole of which you can almost never get out of. There's so many of them. Give us a trial, proposal. Let's fill out this RFP. All of these little things that seem like, the deal is moving forward, but it really is a natural trap that we fall into. Look at your pipeline. If you closed 80% of it, you'd be great. Most companies, and I'm talking to a lot of them at this point right now, the ubiquitous, the problem that's everywhere is that customers want their product, which is not a problem. It's a good thing. They could benefit from it, and they've got the money to spend on it, but they don't do it. Why is that? Well, people think, oh, it's status quo. They don't want to change. People are busy. I hear the budget thing, and I'm like, okay, let's get on the internet. Let's see if they have money. Oh, look, they've got, 30 billion in the bank? Okay, and you're telling me it's because of money. It's not because of money. It's not because of money. If it's because of money, you can qualify that out before you even contact them. Get on the internet, you can see pretty much how much money they have, even if they're private. You can tell, are they hiring? If they're hiring, they've got money. People aren't going to work for free. So they've got money. Do they want to spend it on you? Now is the question. I mean, now spending it on you. Too often we fall into these traps, these excuses. And I'm not talking about bullying your way through it. I'm talking about justifying it. The real selling begins once they decide they want to buy it. And you think, well, no, I'm forecasting it. It's working its way through the system. It's getting political approval. They're building consensus. Or are they? The default is to go, no, let's delay it. Think about yourself when you're buying something big. Why now? Or why not wait? Why not wait kind of wins out unless it's really urgent. How do you make it urgent? That's what the course is about. How do you guide people through it? Because we're typically not selling solely to somebody, the business owner, not in B2B. You might be. And at that point, you got a better handle. But still, they're going to ask their friends. They're going to ask their peers, their partners, their neighbors, their friends. They're going to get different opinions, and they're going to get cold feet. We have to build up that why now. It's a critical element of the sale. And also, take a look at how you spend your day. Are you gambling and guessing, or are you investing? And maybe the gamble thing turns you on, but is it paying? Is it getting you the result that you want? Now, when I put this post out, you get a lot of both. I love when people say both. The person who chases two rabbits catches none, because sales is a game of focus. If you're chasing both, you're a gambler. You won't admit it. And the denial is probably worse than the symptom, because you get this level of confidence that you're an investor, but you're just guessing. You let your day be taken away. You're a sailboat, not a powerboat. A sailboat goes where the wind takes it. or you have to put an enormous amount of effort into guiding the wind to get your boat to go the way you want to. A power boat goes nowhere unless you turn the engine on and somebody's steering it. It goes where the engine pushes it. Be a power boat, because the wind doesn't always blow. But the power boat, as long as you got gas and the engine's working, it moves in the direction you want it to. It's part of that personal responsibility. And too many of us are letting our cadence tools, our DoDumbThingsFaster.com tool, to get us the appearance of selling. Is that really selling, or are you just marketing a commercial that somebody else wrote to some persona that you hope would be interested? That's not selling. That's marketing. That's advertising. It's just done with you instead of by the marketing people. Is it working? Fine, keep doing it. If it's not working, take a step back and say, is there a better way to communicate with people? Here's the answer. Yes. Yes, there is. And it's been working for a long time, but it requires creativity and effort and a systematic step approach that's not about you. That's where the course Winning the Complex Sale comes in. And does it require a little bit of change? Of course it does. If it was the same thing, you get the same results. If you want to get the better results, you got to do a little bit of change. So check that out at b2brevenue.com. If you like sales questions and brutally honest answers, well, go listen to the podcast. I got tons of tips. A lot of people like just the tips, just the quick little once a day, actionable things that will help you sell more. They're short, 5-10 minutes most. Also, if you want to get into leadership, I've got 2 leadership podcasts. The Sales Leadership Show. Check that out. The world's best sales leaders. And we talk about what it takes to be a great sales leader, because there's so few of you out there. I want to put the light on you because I just see so many bad leaders out there today. Because the word leader is, it's really administrator in most cases. And people are kind of letting the operations and administration part of the job take over the job. You're a leader. A leader shows the way. A leader supports people. A leader gets the best out of their people. Doesn't put metrics and KPIs. Would you do that to your kids? Hey kids, your KPIs are a little light today. Get to work. You would never do that. Why? Because it doesn't work, and you know it doesn't work. Why do you apply it to people? How do you get them to be motivated, inspired, to take action, to become great at selling? And guess what? When you do that, your job becomes so much easier. Check out the Sales Leadership Show. Also, everything's on YouTube. Just search Brian Burns Sales on YouTube or Maverick Selling Method. You'll find it. Sales comedy. You like sales comedy? I got all my comedy videos up there. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. Tell a friend about the show.